Folks, as you are aware, it's you go to that one. It's always been my focus when it comes to the Sabbath School time to look at some focus of mission, of outreach, of whether it's in our own backyard or whether it's overseas, wherever it may be. And I thought so often these mission stories end with somebody who has come to the Lord and they've headed off to become a minister somewhere. And I thought, hang on, we have a minister here that came from somewhere. What's his story? And so I've written out some questions here for our pastor, and I hope he feels comfortable. I think so, because he got the questions earlier in the week and said they'd be great, particularly the last one. So we better get quickly to the last ones. But my first question for our Pastor Neil is this. In a sermon not too long ago, you indicated you went to Morisset High School, Neil. And I immediately thought, he maybe never grew up as an Adventist. He grew up in Morisset, Cooranbong. I thought all people in Morisset, Cooranbong, who now are connected with the church in some way, must have grown up an Adventist. Did you grow up an Adventist or not?
Yeah, the answer is no. Well, the answer is kind of like a little iffy. So my dad described himself as a bush Calathumpian.
Oh.
And my mum was raised as an Adventist. So in Cooranbong, there was Strong's Garage in Cooranbong, if you know the area.
Yes.
So she was the daughter of him, of Ted, and she married Dad, and then quickly Dad sort of pulled her out of church life. Then when we were young and we moved from the bush back to the country, back to the area, Mum started taking us along to Memorial Church or to Dora Creek Church, and actually went along to Fordyce Dedamore's campaign that he ran in the Cooranbong area years ago. And my dad actually clung to something that Fordyce said, which was that you Adventists, and he was just laying into the Adventists in his campaign about how that they were hypocrites and did things. And so Dad would always just, that was the only thing out of
that part.
That was the only thing that he would remember was just that. And it was just like, Dad, let it go, Yeah.
Okay. So you obviously grew up in a divided
home, and so went to Bonnells Bay Primary. Going to the Adventist school was never an option. Dad would never have paid for that.
Right.
So it was just through the public system.
Okay. Tell me, somewhere along the road, apart from your mother's influence and taking you along to those two churches and Sabbath schools, etc., what were the influences then that brought you, say, into Christianity and into the Adventist church?
Yeah, it was pretty much from as early as I can remember. I've always been a believer in God. And I remember, for instance, sitting under a pine tree at Bonnells Bay Primary School arguing with Trevor Monk, literally that was his name, that we didn't descend from monkeys. So I was an apologist from an early age. At the age of 10, at a camp meeting in Western Australia, not an Adventist one, but an interdenominational Christian one, is where I actually made, as a 10-year-old, a commitment to follow Christ.
Wow, okay. When did you decide to become a part of the church? What influence, who was involved
So we
there?
came back from that. We were living at the edge of Lake Macquarie at Sunshine, and at around, I was about, about 13, 14 years of age, Mum said to me and my sister, she knew our heart that we were followers of God, and she said, well, I think it's about time you guys got baptised. And we're like, yes. We just said yes. That was it. That was the altar call. And so we then had studies with Pastor Heffron and Pastor Sid Cole, and then we were baptised at Hillview Church.
Wow. All right. Then, somewhere along there, you must have decided to go to Avondale, call to ministry. What came first, a call to ministry first?
No, it was a call to electrical
first,
engineering. So I
really?
went to Newcastle Uni, studied 4 years as an electrical engineer, and while I was there, I had dreams of myself being like an Elijah on the streets of Newcastle doing street preaching. Never really have done street preaching, except for once in Christchurch. Wouldn't do it again. And then years...
Hard work.
Look, it is incredibly hard work. And then at a camp meeting with Andrea's family in South New Zealand, there was an altar call from H.S. Richards Jr., and I found myself standing to enter ministry, and so went through at Avondale then.
Right, okay. Now, you did 4 years at Avondale, or did you do a graduate program?
No, they didn't have that then, and I'm glad they didn't.
Yeah.
Because I think it's much better to do the whole degree.
Okay. Okay. Now, tell me, when you finished Avondale then and you graduated with your ministry degree, we've picked up a little bit of where you went around to different conferences, etc. But I dare say that between your growing up and now getting out on the street and in the different churches that you're in, you're starting to get a vision about how to reach out to the community. Can you share with our church what you feel is important in terms of reaching out to your community?
Yeah, this is our last question, isn't it?
No, the last question is about a divided home.
Okay, all right, that's right. I think the answer to this one is remarkably simple. Who loves parties? Socialising. Who loves socialising? Do you enjoy meeting people and socialising? Yeah. It's kind of fun having people around. So for me, the simplest and the clearest example of this is Matthew. He's the tax collector, and as soon as he gets called to ministry to follow Jesus, he says yes, and then that night he's having a party at his place where he's inviting all his tax collector friends, anyone he knows, and he's inviting them there, and the disciples are there, and Jesus is there. And I think there's a recipe there for a very successful evangelism thing. Now, as a church, we will do more than just parties, but I would love it if you would hold a party at your place. Party is probably too strong a word. You might just call it a high tea, or you might call it afternoon tea, you might call it a social or a games night, or you might call it inviting neighbours around for dinner, whatever it is. But the idea is you would invite some church friends to be with you, you'd invite some of your neighbours or other people you know to be with you who are unchurched, and there's no pressure to share or do anything other than just to get to know each other. And in that space, God will do his thing. Right. And I think that's a really effective way of us just making new friends in community. Beyond that, there are so many needs in community that we could actually get involved in, and we will be focusing on our church actually reaching out into some of those strategic kind of areas. But I think the home party, together with the small group community focus that we have as a church, I think that's going to lead to us having outreach that will be very solid and very strong based on friendship, which is, even those who run campaigns know that the campaigns are only ever successful because church members invite their friends. Right. And the only way we can invite friends is if we actually invested in them. So let's start investing in our friends by inviting church friends and unchurched friends together.
Good. I like it. And obviously we'll hear more about this as we roll along. So it's not just about raising money for the Christmas tree,
I love that, by the way. That was so cool.
And paying for the local hams to go into the...
No, I love that as well. I mean, how cool is that we paid for hams to go out? It's just like, that we might feel uncomfortable with that, but I just think, well, glory to God that it's actually helping people.
Absolutely. All right, I have the last question for you. Is there a ministry that our church should be involved in helping, because this is your background, this is your experience, in helping young people or children and young people growing up in a divided home? Mum may be a member or a Christian, dad may not, or vice versa. Is there a ministry, is there something that we should be aware of there?
Yeah, look, this is such a good question. And until you actually asked me that question this week, I'd never actually thought of the ministry angle of my own experience. But the answer is yes, there is huge potential there, because so often one member of a family will come along to church and they just need love and support and understanding, and they need people to invite them and their partner to their place to get those friendships started and underway. Because one of the things that, my dad, just to use the example of my dad, he would say to Mum literally that if you're late coming home from church, then I'm going to go to the pub and I'll get drunk on Saturdays. And it was just like, it was such a hard world. But Dad went from being that guy to, when I went to college, he said, well, I won't say that because we're in church, but he used some choice language, and thinking that I was going to be brainwashed by the nutters in Cooranbong, literally he said that. And then years later, he was like so delighted that I'm a pastor. So growth takes place, and all that's needed is just friendship, just to keep being in that space, to love and to to show people that we're genuine, we're real, we don't have two heads, we're not weird, we just are followers of Jesus, and Jesus is the most amazing thing in the universe. You know, he really is the most beautiful being, and we just want to introduce him to that. So 2 weeks before my dad died of pancreatic cancer, I'm telling him the story of the two sons, one who the father asked him to work, and the elder son said he would, but didn't, and the younger son said, well, get stuffed. And then my dad, literally knowing what the story is about, said to me, he said, I never said to God to get stuffed. And then he said this, he says, your God is my God. And I tell you, I hang on to those words. But it took a lifetime. It took a lifetime for him to get there. So what's the ministry value for us as a church? It's just to continue loving the partners of people who don't come, to continue loving the children of ours who have wandered away, to invite them into our social networks and to love on them. And God, love always wins.
That's great. Look, I can see that there's a lot more to unpack here.
There is.
But our time
is up. Yep.
Our time is up. But I really do appreciate, one, getting to know a little bit more about your background. It helps, us to understand and get on the level. But also sharing some of your vision for the community, for the, church families. And if I've taken away anything from today, friendship has to be a key word for both those areas.
Well, here's a question for our Sabbath school class this morning. It's not so long ago we used to ask these questions. Carol, you'll remember this. Number of persons helped this week. Do you remember that? We used to ask those questions. And in asking that, we count what's important to us. So here's a question for you. How many of you have got unchurched friends? Yeah. Unchurched family? And if your answer is yes, then can you invite them to your house for a meal? And can you invite some church members with them? And then you get your church members to pray. When you're there, you're not Bible bashing them, because that's the thing that Australians hate the most, is the fear of that. But all you're doing is just having a conversation at a meal and then catching up afterwards, and everything else will flow. They'll be asking you, so what do you do? Oh, well, look, I'm a pastor. Oh, wow, never met a pastor before. Well, let's talk. Well, okay. And conversations naturally take care of themselves if we're willing to go there and just let God do his thing in the middle of that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and may God continue to bless you with your ministry in this church.